I always have the recording. We're going to try to do something lofty, a lofty goal. Well, the study of Tanya is lofty, but the goal here is lofty, where I think I'm going to attempt to do 2 chapters today, both chapters 10 and chapters 11. So last week we did the recap of chapters 1 through 9. And chapters 9 introduces the real struggle and the battle. It begins to bring everything together. The battle of the Beinoni. The Beinoni, the one that's in between. He's neither a tzaddik nor a rasha. He's not righteous in terms of inner perfection, as we'll discuss today, nor is he a rasha, wicked, dealing with evil and sinful behavior. But he's not half and half. So what is the Beinoni? What is the definition of the Beinoni? So he said, on the outside, when we say half and half, is that on the outside, he can look exactly like the tzaddik because he is behaviorally, he's perfect. He does not allow his animal soul, the second soul that every Jew has, he does not allow the animal soul to find any expression within himself or herself. In the 3 garments, we talked about the garments, are thought, speech, and action. And that is the way in which a person expresses themselves, is through active thought, speech, and action. The way you actively think about something, the way you share, speak, and what you do. That's how a person expresses themselves. So on the outside, the Beinoni looks to be perfect because he's not doing anything to allow for his animal soul to find expression. We talked about the animal soul at length. The animal soul in and of itself is not bad, but it's selfish, and that leads to when a selfish lifestyle ultimately leads you down a negative path. It doesn't allow it to find any expression. But on the other hand, on the inside, he looks a lot more like the rasha, like the evil person, than the tzaddik. Why? Because the battle is raging within him or her. Is that they have the 2 souls and they're both very active within the Beinoni. And the Beinoni is constantly feeling. We said there's 2 kings and they both want full control over the country. What are the kings? The kings are both your souls, your godly soul and your animal soul. What is the country that they're looking for complete control over? Is your body. They want full control over your body. They want full expression in your thought, speech, and action. So the Beinoni has not won the war. He's constantly fighting, but he does not allow the fight to impact him on the surface. So it's a life of struggle. It's a life of ups and downs, and I think we could all relate to that because we all have our ups and downs, and we all have that inner turmoil. The Beinoni has found a way to not allow any of that to define him or her. How? That we'll discuss a little bit later, but that's how we define the Beinoni. In chapter 10, as we begin to define the tzaddik. Why are we talking about the tzaddik, the perfectly righteous person? The Tanya is the book of the Beinoni. At the end of the class, we'll discuss this, but primarily for 2 reasons that I would say is one is it's good to know what true holiness is capable of, which is the tzaddik. And 2, in order for the Beinoni to know who he is or she is, it's important to know what they're not. And they're not the tzaddik. They're not perfect. So with that, we'll jump in. So with the Beinoni, as we said, he wins the battle with the animal soul only on the surface level, in the garment level, right? We call the garments as thought, speech, and action. So on that level, in his thought, his speech, his action, when I say him, obviously him and her, they belong to the godly soul. So on the outside, again, the Beinoni may in fact look like a tzaddik, which the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, will explain is a very big mistake. When the Beinoni begins to think of himself as a tzaddik, as being perfect, it can lead to major problems, but we'll get to that. Internally, though, as mentioned, the struggle rages on. He still feels, the Beinoni still feels the pull of the animal soul, still experiences the desires towards physicality, still feels the conflict, inner temptation. It's just that the Beinoni doesn't allow any of these feelings to become manifest behaviorally. Which, let's be clear, this is an amazing, extraordinary accomplishment. Perhaps even greater than the tzaddik and the perfect, righteous person. Because as we'll explain now, the tzaddik is very different. The tzaddik, the perfectly righteous individual, has not only conquered their garments, which is how they behave, But the tzaddik has actually conquered the inner city itself. He's won the war against the animal soul. His mind, his heart, his desires, his instincts, his personality, they've become totally aligned with the godly soul that exists within them. He doesn't just control the animal soul. On some level, he has either completely silenced it or completely transformed it, because as we're going to discuss, there are two categories of the tzaddik. And each one, there are many subcategories, but primarily there are two levels of the tzaddik, the perfect tzaddik and the imperfect tzaddik. When we say imperfect, it's relative. Relative to the Beinoni, to the Rasha, he's perfect. Relative to the perfect tzaddik, he's imperfect. We'll discuss that momentarily. So the tzaddik, again, is not someone who wants to sin, but heroically holds himself back. You may look at that person who wants to sin and heroically holds himself back, and on the surface say, well, that's a righteous person. That's a tzaddik. They're perfect. They never sin. But that's not a tzaddik, because inside there is that deep desire to do what they want to do, which is not always good. That's the Beinoni. The tzaddik doesn't want to sin. The tzaddik doesn't have temptations towards selfish things. In fact, the tzaddik is repulsed by anything that is not holiness. So if this sounds like a concept that we cannot relate to, it's because the tzaddikim are very, very, very rare. It's not very common, because as we'll discuss later on in Tanya, throughout the Tanya, really what God is looking for is for the struggle. And he wants you to find the meaning in the struggle. And if life is perfect, there's not a great amount of accomplishment in that. So the tzaddik, even though there's something extraordinary about the tzaddik, the accomplishment of the tzaddik is not so extraordinary, because the tzaddik doesn't have the battle. The tzaddik doesn't have the struggle. The tzaddik is this person of complete perfection. For most of us, our default if we have these two souls within us. We have the godly soul, which pulls us towards spirituality, godliness, holiness, goodness, morality, kindness. We have the animal soul, which is pulls us towards selfishness, what we want, ego, temptation, and eventually possibly even sinful things. For most of us, the default state, and when we hear that inner voice, which voice is it? Is it the godly soul or is it the animal soul when you want to do something? So for most people, the default is the animal soul. That's kind of because we're living in the physical world. We're not in a state of holiness. So therefore, for most people, the active soul within them is the animal soul. So for example, if any one of us, most of us, if we're hungry, we don't need to ask someone to remind us, like, hey, remind me I got to eat breakfast because I'm so hungry, because I haven't eaten. When we're hungry, the body on its own reminds us, and we then eat because we're in touch with the animal soul. The animal soul has its wants, its needs. Now, hunger is not a bad thing, but it's a physical thing. So when you're hungry, you don't need to be reminded to eat. You go ahead and you eat a meal. When it feels something, you want that thing, and you feel that because we're in touch with our animal soul. But let's say for the men here who put on tefillin daily, we forget to put on tefillin. Been a very busy morning. So we'll ask somebody, hey, or put on our phone a reminder, please remind me that I still need to wrap tefillin. The question is, why the need for the reminder? Why is it not instinctive? We didn't do tefillin. We should have that same feeling of lacking like we feel when we're hungry. So when we think about that, it sounds like a foreign idea, but that's what the tzaddik feels. Food is instinctive to the animal soul. Tefillin is not. Shabbat candles are not instinctive to the animal soul. The tzaddik, the script is flipped. For a tzaddik, putting on tefillin, doing the Shabbat candles, doing mitzvot, is as natural as eating breakfast. So his spiritual life is not something added on to his personality. Like, there's who I am, and then there's the way I serve God. It is his personality. That is the definition. That is the tzaddik has that constant connection to his godly soul. So the tzaddik's instincts are not instincts towards physicality. They're instincts towards spirituality. The tzaddik has desires, a desire to do mitzvot. And the tzaddik's natural reflexes, become completely aligned with their godly soul. And just as our body cries out for nourishment when we're hungry, we get hangry and we get a feeling of discomfort, the tzaddik's soul naturally cries out for a mitzvah and feels physical discomfort when it doesn't have that mitzvah. It doesn't need to be reminded to put on tefillin. It feels something is missing. We need to do tefillin. It's a very obviously deep level. That's the definition of the tzaddik. The tzaddik is not simply someone who is able to overcome his temptation. He's someone who doesn't have temptation. His inner world has been transformed until godliness is no longer something that he struggles to choose. It's become his very nature. The godly soul has become the defining voice in the life of the tzaddik. And in chapter 10 continues to explain that there are two, as I mentioned before, that there are two general levels of the tzaddik, the righteous individual. There's the tzaddik gamor, the complete tzaddik, and the tzaddik she'eino gamor, the tzaddik who is incomplete. The tzaddik gamor is also called tzaddik v'tovlo. He's the tzaddik and it's only good for him. And the tzaddik, then there's the other tzaddik, the tzaddik she'eino gamor, the incomplete tzaddik. It says he's the tzaddik v'ralo. There's still a little vestige of evil within him. What does that mean? So first, the complete tzaddik. What level has the complete tzaddik achieved that the incomplete tzaddik hasn't achieved? That the complete tzaddik has done something utterly astonishing. The complete tzaddik has actually transformed the animal soul, the second soul that every Jew has completely transformed the soul into a force of goodness. So now they have two godly souls. Now the other soul is still called an animal soul because it's still the enlivening soul, it's still what gives him his life. But he's harnessed it fully to be on his side. It's now no longer an enemy. It's no longer just subdued, but it's actually now a partner in his service to Hashem, a partner in holiness. The tzaddik she'eno gamor, on the other hand, he still possesses the animal soul, some trace of the animal soul of the evil, but this remaining evil or physicality or mundanity is completely subdued and nullified. So it may be present, but it doesn't have a voice because it's so overwhelmed by the godly soul. So imagine you had mentioned about going to Texas and being around some people that weren't necessarily your people, you said.
It's true. That happened. That did happen.
But imagine you're one and there's 4 or 5 of those people. So it's harder to be able to be that voice of reason when you're surrounded by other people that are not necessarily in the same way of thinking of you.
I can say please and thank you. It's crazy. It's insane.
But imagine you have 100 awesome people, and one person is a troublemaker or wants to, act up. But if they're surrounded by the overwhelming goodness, they're probably going to stay quiet. They're not going to have it's not the right infrastructure. It's not the right place for them to express what they're feeling. So it gets overwhelmed. The darkness gets overwhelmed by the light, and you can actually influence that person towards goodness. Now, has he been transformed? No. But you don't hear it so much because overwhelmed by surrounded by light, surrounded by goodness. And the same is true with the second level of the tzaddik. The animal soul is still there, but because of just how the godly soul has found such a voice, an inner voice, so much expression. It's like a light shining so powerfully within himself that the animal soul doesn't have a voice to speak up. It's just so overwhelmed by the energy, by the light, by the goodness of the godly soul, which is a great concept. But this is the second level of the tzaddik. So the incomplete tzaddik has removed all evil from his conscious life. Subconsciously, there might be some, but it doesn't have the strength to stand up and utilize its voice. Not in a bad way, in a good way, because its voice is going to pull you towards negativity. The complete tzaddik, on the other hand, has actually transformed it. So he's gone to the animal soul. He's put his arm over his shoulder and he says, "Hey, let's partner. Let's use all of your tools, all of your resources, all of your energy. Let's use it out for goodness." And the animal soul, in the case of the tzaddik, agrees to it and becomes utterly good. So now What's the advantage? The advantage is you have this double engine. You have more horsepower. Literally, the animal soul. You have horse. You have an extra horsepower to be able to be a tremendous force of light and goodness in the world, because you've taken this other part of you and you've not just subdued it, which is the second level of the tzaddik, but the higher level of tzaddik, you actually transform it and it becomes a force for goodness. Because why can you do that? How can I transform it? It's the animal soul, it's negativity. Because as we've said throughout Tanya, the animal soul on its own, it's considered animalistic, but selfish, but not necessarily wicked. In and of itself is not wicked. It's not evil. What does an animal want? An animal wants, why do we call it the animal soul? The animal soul? Because there's a selfishness that an animal has that's not bad. It's nature. An animal wants to exist. It wants its comfort. It wants security, and it wants self-preservation. And what the animal wants, it gets. When the animal is tired, it goes to sleep. When the animal is hungry, it prays for food. It doesn't have this higher sort of calling for truth. It's just, it is what it is. So that's what our animal soul is. It is what it is. It wants self-preservation. It wants to feel good. And this can, of course, become destructive, but the essential energy of the animal soul is not evil. The animal soul, if the energy is dressed in other words, if it expresses itself in selfishness, in indulgence, in its ego, in emptiness, then it pulls a person downward, right? Because what does it want? It wants to find expression in thought, speech, and action. When it does that, that leads the person pulls a person downward. But if those garments, which we call here, he quotes from the Zohar, they're called filthy garments or dirty garments, because the animal soul is using out thought, speech, and action for selfish reasons. If those filthy garments are removed, then I could take that energy from the animal soul and I can redirect it, if you're the tzaddik. And the drive for life, the drive for physicality, the drive, the pleasure, and all of the energy in the animal soul can be harnessed and can become a drive for godliness. Its passions can become holy passions because we want those passions. We just want to use it for holiness. The strength can become a strength to serve God, to be a force of goodness. And this is what the complete tzaddik does. He removes those filthy garments. He doesn't allow the animal soul to find expression in thought, speech, and action. And then the animal soul itself, when he removes those garments, now he can get to the core. He can get to the animal soul itself, to the source of the energy, and it can then be elevated and transformed. An example of this. A good example of this is a teenager. A grandfather, grandmother, grandparents, they live usually very scheduled, predictable lives. You know, grandpa wakes up at the same time. He has the same breakfast. He reads the paper. He goes to sleep, has his bedtime. The teenager is very different. There's mood swings. There's energy. There's passions. There's restlessness. And there's sometimes rebellion. The teenager doesn't want to be boxed in. So many educators will make the mistake of thinking that we have to subdue this energy. This energy is not good. So we crush it and try to discipline, try to suppress it, and turn the teenager into Bubby. Turn the teenager into Zadie. Just wake up when I tell you to, eat when I tell you to, eat what I tell you to, do what I ask you to do, live a predictable life. Risk-free life. But the Tanya teaches us this important point, or the complete tzaddik teaches us this important point, that energy itself is not bad. Passion itself is not bad. Desire itself is not bad. Even rebelliousness, the heart of that is not bad. The question is, where does it go and how does it express itself? If it goes to emptiness, if it goes to negativity, then yes, certainly it could be destructive. But if it is educated and it can be redirected, then it can become a tremendous force of goodness. That's why the Rebbe always tried to inspire, was always the youth. Is if we can get the youth, then we have a movement that can create change. Now, it's risking it all because the youth, they're unpredictable and they could rebel. And so it's a very sort of dangerous thing to do. But if I can get them, then we'll succeed. Because we'll have something that the Bubbies and Zadies don't have, which is the passion for life. That begins to, as you get more and more boxed in, you sort of can begin to, that begins to fade. But it's at its greatest when you're younger. So the goal is not to kill the fire, not to subdue the fire. The ultimate goal is to teach where the fire should burn. Now the Beinoni, as we'll say, is not there yet. He doesn't have enough control to be able to manipulate and to cultivate and to transform the animal soul, because he's still fighting the fight. So he's not at the point yet of transformation. It doesn't mean, though, that we can't learn the lesson from the tzaddik, the important idea of transformation, because in certain areas, yes, we can harness negative energy for positivity. We're not going to be able to completely transform it like the tzaddik, but it is something that can absolutely inspire us in specific areas of our life. You know, we have the Sitin in the Kineo Valley, but Sitin is an international Chabad organization, Chabad Teen. And it's amazing what Sitin has done. It's Chabad will bring out a young couple, and their primary focus is on the teenagers. That's all that's their shlichut. That's their mission when they move to the community, is teenagers. Creating the infrastructure, creating Jewish programs, creating hangouts. And what are we looking from the teenagers? They're not looking to subdue their energy and turn them into like these, yeshivas that they're just kind of, losing their passion for life. No, the C-teen is we want to take that passion, we want to take that energy, but let's try to utilize it for goodness. And it's amazing because what the teenagers are able to do, the energy that they have, it's an amazing energy. They go once a year to New York for the C-teen weekend, for the Shabbaton, and they go to Times Square. Thousands of teenagers in Times Square. You may have seen these clips, the highlights. It's amazing, and they're dancing, and they're rowdy, and they're excited, and they're singing. And if it was full of adults, we wouldn't have that same energy. And that moment is like so special. These are teenagers from Agoura Hills, teenagers from Nebraska, from Argentina, from all across the world, and here they are in a place of holiness, singing about Jewish pride, Am Yisrael Chai, and that's the flame of life. That if we can get that and we can transform that, that's something. There's something so beautiful. How does the tzaddik do it? How does the tzaddik do it that the Beinoni doesn't, or the Rasha doesn't? How is he able to reach this level of either subduing the negativity or transforming it? It's because of his love for God. Through love. The complete tzaddik he's been able to cultivate such a profound and deep love for Hashem, for God, that anything that opposes godliness becomes like repulsive to him. It's like disgusting. Because he's so in love with God that anything that opposes that to him, that's like repulsive. Because his love is so deep, anything that pulls him away from Hashem becomes disgusting. This is like seeing someone who, God forbid, hurts a person that you love. You'll be repulsed by that person. And this is how Tzaddik has developed such a deep and passionate love for Hashem that anything else becomes so repulsive. So it's not even that he's like the Beinoni, he has to overcome the temptation. There is no temptation. In fact, there is a disgust towards anything that is not goodness, that is not godliness. The Alter Rebbe quotes the verse from King David in Psalms.
She wants to attend.
The newest member of our Tanya class.
She's been here from the beginning.
She has actually been here from the beginning, taking it all in. I was going to say maybe she has to watch the YouTube to catch up, but she's been here the whole time. The Alter Rebbe quotes the verse. The Alter Rebbe is the author of the Tanya. He quotes the verse from Psalms, from King David. He says, "I hate them with a consuming hatred." So, why is King David talking about hate? I hate them with a consuming hatred. They have become enemies to me. Search me and know my heart. That's what King David says. So the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, explains it in this way. He says, if you want to know why I hate that which opposes you, search my heart. See how deeply I love you, God. And as an outcome of that, the hatred towards that which opposes you comes from the deep love that I have to you. So the tzaddik has developed such a deep love for Hashem. The stronger the love for truth, the stronger the disgust for evil, for falsehood, for that which opposes truth. So this tzaddik has reached the level that he doesn't have to fight temptation the way the rest of us do. And he's called, and the Tanya calls him the Ben Aliyah. The Ben Aliyah. He's a person of ascent. That he doesn't just avoid evil like the incomplete tzaddik. This is the complete tzaddik. With him there's an aliyah. He elevates it, he transforms it. There's this aliyah, is this transcendence that he has accomplished through the transformation of his godly soul. of his animal soul. The incomplete tzaddik, he's also a tzaddik, but that transformation is not complete. The remaining evil is there, but it's nullified. Nullified meaning it doesn't have that voice, but not transformed. There's a halachic concept of bitul, of something which is nullified. So if a person, and this is a question you'll get or you study when if you're learning for your smicha, for rabbinic ordination, you learn about the laws of kosher, and these are questions that a rabbi will get. Get a phone call, say I was cooking some kind of meat dish. Maybe it was a stew, and the recipe called for butter, but I had margarine, which is parev, and that's not dairy. I had margarine in my refrigerator, and I thought that I had used the margarine, but I looked at the counter and I realized that I had used the butter. So now there's some butter, which is dairy, mixed in with the meat. We know there's a problem mixing meat and milk, but there's a halachic concept of batul. If the flavor of the butter is totally overwhelmed by the stew that you can't taste it, it's kosher. And you can eat it. You can serve it. You can serve the cholent, this meat stew, with the butter inside of it. Now there's a problem because we don't want to taste it. Because what if we taste it and we taste the butter? That means we just ate not kosher. So there's a mathematical equation which is 1 to 60. If we could assume reasonably, and it's not so hard to figure that out if you did a teaspoon of butter or a tablespoon of butter or whatever of butter against the stew, if it's 1 against 60, then you could assume that the flavor has been nullified. Now, with regards to this halacha, it's something interesting. Can you say that there is no butter in the stew? Can't say it. There is definitely butter in the stew, except you can't taste it. It's nullified. It's there, but it's nullified. That's the second tzaddik, the Alter Rebbe says. He connects, very interestingly, from this law of kosher, he connects it with the law of the tzaddik. The tzaddik has, inside the tzaddik, it's overwhelmingly good. There is a little bit of treif, a little bit of the animal soul, but the animal soul is nullified at least 1 to 60. Maybe it's 1 to 1,000. Maybe it's 1 to 1,000,000. But even if it's 1 to 1,000,000, it's still there. He hasn't transformed it. It's just been totally nullified. That's the lower tzaddik. Very high level. Complete and utter nullification of any negativity. It's just, you can't yet call him the complete tzaddik because he hasn't transformed the animal soul into this force of goodness. The tzaddik she'eino gamer, the incomplete tzaddik, the Alter Rebbe says, while it's not common, it's not completely rare to have this to have this level. Now, I would say is that in the times of the Alter Rebbe, this was much more obvious than it is today. Today, especially after the Holocaust and in Europe, there was many tzaddikim. There was many truly righteous individuals through and through. We've gone through, as we get further into exile and the times become more challenging, it's definitely much not as common as it was, but there was always more common to have the incomplete tzaddik than to have the complete tzaddik. The complete tzaddik, the tzaddik gamor, the Alter Rebbe says is completely rare, to the extent that you could have maybe one in a generation. It's not something that's common, because about this level, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, I have seen the Bnei Aliyah. Remember we call them the Ben Aliyah? Those that have reached the elevated status of transforming their animal soul. This is a tremendous accomplishment, to actually transform the source of all physical and passions and temptations, to transform it to goodness, to holiness. It's extremely rare. He says, I have seen the Bnei Aliyah, and they are few. So this is what chapter 10 teaches us. Most of us are not holding the level of tzaddik, neither the higher level of the tzaddik nor the lower level of the tzaddik. In fact, the Tanya later teaches us that becoming the tzaddik is not even the goal for us. We're not trying to attain the level of the tzaddik. The path expected of us is the path of the Beinani, which is why we're learning the Tanya. It's called the book of the Beinani. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we'll conclude the first chapter with this, the first chapter of today, chapter 10. Why devote if our goal is not to achieve the level of a tzaddik, and it's not something that is in the cards for us. Our goal is to try to reach the level of a Beinoni. Why devote an entire chapter of the Tanya to a tzaddik? So this is a question that someone could have when reading this chapter. The Alter Rebbe doesn't address this directly, but two ideas are, and I mentioned this in the very beginning. First is, chapter 10 tells us what true holiness looks like. It's important to understand what true holiness is able to accomplish. Holiness doesn't mean becoming less human, meaning removing yourself from the human experience, from the experience of living life. It doesn't mean destroying the physical and mundane parts of your life. The Beinoni sometimes has to be in that battle, and he has to remove himself from physicality and hold himself back and work on discipline, because for him it's challenging. But true holiness, when you tap into that, as the complete tzaddik does, is so powerful that it could actually uncover the deeper purpose within physicality, the deep purpose within every drive that a person has, and redirect it towards godliness. The animal soul longs for life. What does the tzaddik do? The tzaddik teaches the animal soul what true life really looks like. It says, I don't want to crush you and say, don't live life. I don't want you to not have any passions and desires and have the joy and to lose the joy and spark and fire for life. No, we want that. That's good. But we can find the inner true drive of life, which is to live a purposeful life, a life of meaning. Because the animal soul, it longs for life. So the tzaddik teaches it what real life looks like. The Beinoni has not yet reached this level. So he remains in the struggle, constantly choosing to place his godly soul over his animal soul, even though the animal soul is pulling him in the opposite direction. But the tzaddik shows us this vision, this highest vision of what true holiness looks like. Not only control, not only to subdue, but true transformation. And it's an important aspect, even in a very small way, for us to try to implement. We're not going to be the tzaddik, but the idea of transforming negativity and to transform those very energies into positivity. And I would say the second reason, as I mentioned again in the very beginning, which was equally as important, is we have a whole chapter on what the tzaddik is for the Beinoni to understand that that's not him, that he doesn't have that, because the Beinoni has that inner struggle, the inner temptations. So if he's asking himself, I see the tzaddik next to me, and we seem to be the same, why am I experiencing inner struggle? I must be a hypocrite. I must be failing in some area. Comes chapter 10 and says, that's the tzaddik. The tzaddik has transformed or completely subdued it. If you're feeling those inner struggles, if you're feeling that inner battle, you're not a tzaddik. And not only is that not okay, or not only is it okay, but there's something so beautiful and something so awesome in the service of the Beinoni, as we'll discuss throughout Tanya, that in the struggle, you have the opportunity to create a deep sense of fulfillment and a purpose and an accomplishment in that way of life. That's chapter 10. Let's get to chapter 11. If chapter 9 was telling us the core inner identity of the Beinoni, that the Beinoni is truly living with the battle going on within themselves, so the divine soul of the animal soul, they're each trying to capture the body, but the Beinoni is the one that does not allow the animal soul to find expression. So even though he's still it's like the Iron Dome. Imagine the Iron Dome is like the Beinoni. Imagine the Iron Dome was 100% effective. Does that mean there are no missiles being shot into Israel? It doesn't mean that. The enemy is still there trying to pummel you. You've just figured out a way to not allow it to control you, to define you, to stop it. But you're still in the battle. The war is still waging and raging on within these enemies. It's just you figured out a way to totally stop it. That's sort of the Beinoni. The struggle's there. The rockets are falling. It's just he doesn't allow it to find, doesn't allow the animal soul to find expression within him or her. How? That's going to be chapters 12 and on. Where does the Beinoni find that inner courage to be able to not defeat, but to be able to not be impacted behaviorally by the animal soul? That's sort of the Beinoni. Chapter 10 is, what we just did, is the definition of the tzaddik in the context of that struggle, that the tzaddik has either subdued his enemy, that there are no more missiles flying. Now, are the enemies still there? Yes, but they're in prison. So we have the enemies, they're still alive, but they're all in prison. So they're no longer firing missiles. That's the incomplete tzaddik. What's the complete tzaddik? What's the complete tzaddik done? He's actually taken those enemies and now they're on his team and now they're fighting against evil together. Crazy idea. That's why we're describing something that seems so extraordinary. That's why these perfect tzaddikim are so rare. To be able to take the enemy and say, hey, let's become pals and let's join my team. Sounds like something out of a crazy movie. Action heroes, taking the bad, flipping him to good, right? But that's what the complete tzaddik does. So if we've covered the Beinoni, we've covered what the inner dimension of the Beinoni, the inner dimension of the tzaddik, the two levels. Chapter 11 tells us about the Rasha. The Rasha is the wicked person. Now we use the word wicked, it's not the true translation. As we'll see soon, that there are many levels of Rasha that are in fact very high and lofty levels. We use the word Rasha, meaning that the Ra within him, the source of evil within him, which is animal soul, is still there. And not only that, but from time to time finds expression within him, or always finds expression within him. And that's the Rasha, where he's not in control, he's neither transformed and subdued it like the tzaddik, but even as the Beinoni, the Beinoni does not allow the animal soul to find expression, he does. To which level? There's many different levels of the Rasha. In direct, and that's what we'll discuss now, in direct contrast to the tzaddik, whose divine soul overpowers the animal soul, the Rasha is one whose animal soul overpowers his divine soul. And as we'll see in the Tanya, that most people are in somewhere in between the kind of vast description of what the Rasha is. And it sounds like to be a Rasha is a bad person, but in the definition of the Tanya, it's not. It's someone who has a strong animal soul and is still learning how to deal with it. And again, many different levels. The rank of the Rasha is also divided into two general categories. There's the complete Rasha, which opposite. In the case of the tzaddik, the complete tzaddik is a good thing, better than the incomplete tzaddik. In the flip side, the complete Rasha is worse because it means he's more towards the category of being completely bad, although he's never completely bad, as we'll discuss. And then there's the incomplete Rasha. The Alter Rebbe begins chapter 11. He says one opposite the other. Just like in chapter 10, we have on the one side the complete tzaddik and the incomplete tzaddik. On the opposite side, we have the complete Rasha and the incomplete Rasha. The Rasha who knows good, in other words, there is the inner goodness within him, is opposite the tzaddik who knows evil. They're sort of teammates, meaning the good within this Rasha, within his divine soul, which is, we said, is the home for it is in the brain and the intellect. That's where the home for the godly soul. It is there, but it's subservient and it's nullified within the evil within the physicality of the animal soul. So the Rasha who knows good, knows meaning connects with and understands good. This is the person whose animal soul overpowers the divine soul to the point that the good is subdued, but we haven't gotten rid of it. And this rank has many, 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 many levels. Just as the tzaddik who has within him some evil, we said there's many different levels. Is it nullified 1 to 60? Is it nullified 1 to 1,000? The same is true with the Rasha who has within him good. How much of the good has been nullified depends on his level. Many different categories. In fact, the same person could be at a different category today and a different category tomorrow. The Alter Rebbe explains the difference between the Rasha who has good within him and the Rasha who doesn't have good is both in quantity and in quality. So quantity means how much does the evil prevail within this person and to what extent. Quality means which part of the person is affected. Because remember we said there are three garments, there are three ways in which the animal soul wants to express itself. There are some levels of Rasha where the expression of the animal soul is minor. But if it's there, then he can't be called a tzaddik and he can't be called a Beinoni, because if there's any expression of the animal soul, he's not quite the level of a Beinoni. Or the expression of the animal soul is greater, and they're considered a bigger Rasha. So the Alter Rebbe first gives us the highest level of the Rasha V'Tovlo, which is a very high level. This is the person whose evil within him, the animalistic side within this person, prevails only slightly. It doesn't happen constantly. It doesn't happen frequently. On rare occasions, for this highest level of the incomplete tzaddik, incomplete Rasha, the Rasha in which there is inner goodness, on rare occasions does the evil prevail over the goodness and conquers the small city, which is the body. And even when the evil does take a hold of the person, it doesn't conquer the entire body. It only affects a part of the body. The part of the body that is, right, we have thought, speech, and action, only affects action, which seems to me maybe worse, because it's the way the person behaves is worse than the way he speaks and thinks. But there's actually, the way a person acts is the most external to themselves. So the fact that he didn't do something momentarily that was good, that means that the animal soul hasn't really taken full control in the driver's seat. So we're describing someone here, the highest level of the Rasha is seemingly very close to the level of a tzaddik, except he allows from time to time, infrequently, the animal soul to get the better of him and to conquer the small city temporarily, and he does something that's not good and allows for the animal soul to find expression in action. And even if it's an action, it's only through a minor action, a minor transgression, not a major one on this highest level. Or it could express itself just in speech, saying something momentarily that wasn't good, or, which would be like speaking negatively, or not actually full-fledged negative talk, but even something very subtle, or through sinful thought, allowing the animal soul to find expression in thought, in his intellect. And the Alter Rebbe emphasizes that you would think that this is the most insignificant, because to do something and to say something is really bad, but to think something, okay, I thought it. But the Alter Rebbe actually flips it, and he says, to the contrary, in certain ways, and we've discussed this idea earlier, contemplation of sin or negative thoughts could be even more severe than the act itself, because thought is much more refined than speech and action. Thought is much deeply sort of connected and united with the person. The way a person thinks is much more deeply connected to their core. So if they're thinking about something negative, it means the animal soul has found a deeper way of manifesting itself within the person, that it's actually impacting their thought, as opposed to speech, which is more external, and behavior, which is the most external. So when the animal soul gets you to do something bad, that's the most external. That's the smallest expression of victory for the animal soul. But when it gets you to think, it means it's actually infiltrated the home of the godly soul, that you're actually thinking negativity here. Now we're talking about something very, very minor, very small, and very infrequent. But if at all you have any expression of the animal soul, it means in that moment the Rasha, the animal soul, has taken control over the city, or one aspect of it. He goes as far as to say that even a person that has the ability to study Torah at a particular time, and they're sitting down to study, but instead they turn to purposeless matters, which we discussed last week. The Mishnah says, one who awakens at night and turns his heart to vanity is guilty against his own soul. In those cases, too, we say that he's in the category of a Rasha that has good within him. Because at that moment, he's allowed his animal soul to find expression. So whether it's in thought, whether it's in speech, whether it's in action, even in a minor way, at that moment, the person is called a Rasha. Why? Because at that moment, the expression of his animal soul has prevailed and found expression, has clothed itself in the body, in the garments, whether it be thought, speech, or action. And now we can understand the difference between, finally answering the question from the very beginning of Tanya, the difference between the tzaddik, the Beinoni, and the Rasha. The tzaddik doesn't experience struggle, at least in the ordinary way that we understand. the animal soul has either been totally nullified and subdued or transformed to goodness. The Beinoni still experiences the struggle, but never allows the struggle to determine his behavior. Not in thought, not in speech, not in action. He fights the fight. He doesn't, it's still in the battle, but he never surrenders to the control of thought, speech, and action to allow for the animal soul to find inner expression within his thought, speech, or action. The Rasha, however, sometimes loses. The animal soul doesn't always remain just an inner struggle, an inner feeling, an inner temptation. It actually does conquer the person's behavior. How frequently the animal soul wins helps us understand to what extent is he a Rasha. Is he just a little teeny Rasha, or is he a greater Rasha? The Alter Rebbe explains another type of Rasha. This is still in the category of Rasha V'tovlo, the Rasha that has goodness within him. This is the person who the evil does prevail much more frequently, and he may even commit more serious sins. Yet he could still be called a Rasha V'tovlo. Why? Because we're describing a person that as soon as he does the sin, or soon after he does the sin, he experiences remorse. He feels bad about it. The thoughts of tshuva, of like, oy, what did I do? They enter into the person's mind. What does this mean? It means that the good within him is still very much active. So he's still called the Rasha V'tovlo. He's still called the incomplete Rasha, meaning there's still still a lot of good within him. Even if he's sinning frequently, meaning he's messing up quite often, as soon as he does it, or very often, he feels the remorse. He's like, I shouldn't have done that. I know better. This is still a Rasha V'tovlo. This is still a very, very good category. And in fact, this is where the Alter Rebbe says, this is where most Jews kind of hang out. This is the area in which the vast majority of people, this is where they're hanging out. Where the animal soul gets them. Negative thought, negative speech, and even negative behavior. But they still have, quite often, this feeling of, why did I do that? Why did I say that? After they go ahead and do something they shouldn't have done. We say that every mitzvah and every avera, every sin, has both an and an oy vey. The question is, what's the order? When it comes to a mitzvah, while you're doing the mitzvah, you're saying oy. It's hard, you got to get up early, you got to go to shul, you got your fasting and Yom Kippur. While you're doing it, you're saying oy. But when it's over, you feel good and you say, I prevailed. When the person does the sin, it's the flip side. While they're doing the sin, right, they're involved in that pleasure, it's, this feels good. The second it's over, it's like, what did I do? Why did I do that? Right? You think about, overindulging at a restaurant while you're eating, it's so good. The moment you walk out, you're like, why did I do that? And there's so many examples of that. So the Rasha V'tovlo, the lower category of the Rasha V'tovlo, the incomplete Rasha, that lower category, he's not yet the complete Rasha, but the lower category of the incomplete Rasha. He does sinful things. He messes up. He falls victim to his animal soul, meaning his animal soul is very much alive within him. But so is the godly soul. The godly soul is present enough that after he does that, he feels he feels that remorse. The good is not strong enough to allow him to conquer the evil, to not allow it to find expression. It doesn't have enough inner expression to be able to conquer the animal soul behaviorally. It doesn't bring him to the point of completely abandoning sin and sinful thought, speech, and action like the Beinoni. But he's still considered a Rasha, that there's much good within him because he still has those feelings of remorse, meaning that godly soul is still very much alive. About this, our sages say the wicked are full of remorse. Without learning the Tanya, without understanding this idea, how do you understand this statement? The wicked are full of remorse. They're wicked. It's talking about this Rasha that we're describing. He's not a bad person. He's someone who allows, when we say wicked, it means he allows his animal soul to dominate over his godly soul. But they're full of remorse, meaning they're still full of godly soul. They're still full of neshama. And that neshama is what speaks up after and says, what did you do? You know better. Now, the next time you go to want to do that thing, the godly soul doesn't have enough power, doesn't have enough of the resources at this point to overcome the animal soul. But the moment it's over, once again, you have that feeling of remorse. That's the secret of Jewish guilt. Why does a person feel bad after doing something wrong? Why not just move on? Why not just, right? Why does a conscience start making noise and saying like, Oy, why did you do that? Because we still have the godly soul. We didn't get rid of it. Even if the animal soul is the primary active voice and force within you, you still have the divine soul, the godly soul, which is holy, which is good. So when the person acts against truth, it's acting against the very nature of the soul that exists within them, against their deepest truth, their deepest essence, their blueprint. So the soul, the animal, the godly soul feels so uncomfortable. So it protests and says, why did you do that? And that's the feeling of remorse. That's the feeling of regret. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that, right? You're about to say something to somebody and you don't have the ability to withhold yourself. The moment those the words leave your mouth, you say, why did I say that? Why did I do that? That's the godly soul in that moment saying, hello, you just attacked me in my core, my essence. Why? That's the Jew. That's the Jewish guilt. It comes from the remaining goodness of the nefesh elokis, the godly soul you have within you. These, say the Alter Rebbe, these represent this category represents the majority of us. People whose soul there remains very much good, and this good causes us, we don't always have the strength to prevail over the animal soul, but it causes and it leads to those feelings of remorse and inner uneasiness, this unrest when we go ahead and do something we shouldn't do. So as we see, there are many categories within the Russia Vitovlo, the Russia in which there is good, and there's a lot more, because it's all about how much goodness there is versus how much control the animal soul has. And so there are literally myriads, like infinite amount of categories, because it could be 98% to 2%, it could be 98.5% to 1.5%, right? It's just how much, if you want to look at it in percentages, which is, but we're talking about the overwhelming, right? When there's a room that's very dark. If I light a very small candle, it will dispel much darkness, but it's not going to make the room bright. The more you increase in that light, it's just a battle between the darkness and light, how much darkness there is versus how much light there is. If you light a match outside in a very, very dark space, an area, in a vast area, even though that immediate area may have some light, just down, a short while, away, it will still be dark. The more brightness there is, the more it overcomes. So this is just this constant struggle and battle where the incomplete Russia allows for the animal soul to find expression, but he has also the godly soul which kind of pushes back. And the difference is simply how deeply the good is dominated by the evil. And then after defining the Russia who knows good, which is the incomplete Russia, the Alter Rebbe now turns to the Russia who knows only evil. And this is the person who sins and doesn't feel remorse. They have no thought of tshuva, of repentance after they sin. And this is called a Russia who knows only evil. What's happened here is that the evil in his soul, the animalistic tendencies and his pull towards his animal soul has prevailed so strongly over the person that the good has been subdued. Now, to be clear, it doesn't mean that the good is destroyed. It can never be destroyed. In fact, even though we said about the complete tzaddik that he could transform the animal soul to goodness, the Russia can never transform the godly soul into negativity. He can never do that. He could just subdue it and crush it to the extent where it's not felt and experienced within him, but it's always there. We said it can reach, the furthest it can reach in terms of how much it is subdued is where it's called a level of makif, where it's actually sort of not even experienced within his body. Makif means it surrounds him, where it's actually like sort of departed from his body and it just hovers around him, where it's there, but he can't tap into it. He doesn't feel that remorse because it's been so overwhelmed. The body is so filled with self, with ego, with animal soul, it doesn't allow any room. Think about a cup that's full, it doesn't allow room for any other experience. So there's no room for the godly soul to find expression. So we don't say it's gone, can never be gone, but we say it's sort of like has overflown from the cup and it's on the outside trying to get back in. In other words, the good is no longer part of their inner conscious reality. And that's why a lot of people lead very, very animalistic, selfish, but even sinful lifestyles, and they do very bad things, and they don't seem to have any remorse. This is what we're describing. And even within that, there are many categories. They're no longer in touch with the godly soul that's within them. it sort of, again, hovers over them in an external way. And this is the meaning of the Rasha Viralo, the complete Rasha. But nevertheless, this person is still considered a Jew. Af al pi shechata Yisraelhu. Even though he or she has sinned, they're still a Jew. Since they still possess a divine soul, even if it's only present in a hidden, surrounding way, the good is still there. And there is a way to reintroduce it. How? I have to find a way to reduce the ego, reduce the animal soul, find a way to do that to allow for the godly soul to once again find expression. It's much harder than the other level of Rasha, where the good is very active within him, or at least somewhat active within him. So then I have to just work on cultivating it more and more. For the complete Rasha, it's much harder, it's much more challenging, it's much more difficult. Yet he still possesses a divine soul, and it can still be activated. And this is the important conclusion of chapter 11. That no matter how far a Jew may feel, no matter how far a Jew may have fallen, the divine soul is never gone. It's never extinguished. It could be buried. It could be hidden. It could no longer be felt consciously, but it always remains. And therefore, the possibility of return is always there, always remains. And with that, we'll conclude. Those are both chapters 10 and 11, and we'll be continuing with the Beinoni. It struggles. How does the Beinoni find, the person who's a Beinoni find within themselves the ability to withstand the forces of the animal soul, because the animal soul's forces are very much alive within it. How does he subdue it to not allow it to find expression with thoughts within his thought, speech, and action? To be continued. Any